So we are on to the panel section. We're fortunate to have a wide array of expertise in our panel discussion. We have a mixture of researchers in parasitology, farmers, vets, and industry. So we will run this much as we did in the previous sessions. We have some pre-prepared questions for each panelist. So I'll introduce the panelist and ask those pre-prepared questions, but please use Mentimeter then, and we will take questions that are most voted. So I first want to introduce Herve Hoste, who is at INRAE and École Nationale Vétérinaire de Toulouse, in Toulouse, and many of you will know Herve for his track record of work, particularly in plant secondary metabolites and nutraceuticals. So we've asked Herve to expand on 2 questions initially. So welcome, Herve. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. How are you? Fine.
The first question is, what are the current and future possibilities regarding plant-based therapies and nematophagous fungi in ruminants?
I think first it's important to define what is plant-based. I mean, it can be nutraceuticals, but it can be also essential oils or phytotherapeutic drugs. So it's important to make the difference. And again, nematophagous fungi, of course, we are thinking of Dictonia flagrans and all the work done by Copenhagen University, but there are other possibilities and other species which can be used. Then in regard of the current possibilities and of applications, if I'm using the grid which has been presented in the introduction, I think we have scientific evidence on efficiency, on the lack of toxicity for the animals. We have some knowledge on the mechanism, and in the efficiency, we have also some information on the possibility to use this solution against a range of nematodes. On the other hand, for the on-farm application, we have also both for fungi and plants, probably information on how to use them, how much do we need to apply, how long do we need to apply, and sometimes we have also information on when is it better to apply this sort of solution. Saying that, I think there are still a lot of possibilities and questions to solve for the future. One of the key questions for the two alternative solutions is probably the variability in results. And for this, and to try to solve this question, we have to better understand the mechanism of action. For the plant, for example, is what are the secondary metabolites which are active? How can we dose them? And for the mechanism of action, it's also how does it affect the worms, the different stage of the worms, and both the function and the structure of the worms. But this is worth to be addressed because it can give some possibilities of application on farm. For example, it's important for taking the example of tanniniferous plants. It is important to be able to characterize a resource before use and to have also a cheap way of measurements. If it's too complex, it will not be adopted by the farmers. It will be considered to be too costly. So that's one of the points. The second point is also, and it has been evoked previously, particularly by Barbara's talk, we have a lot of information on the efficiency and possible mechanism, but one of the points which has not been addressed is toxicity, possible toxicity and residues affecting the consumer. So of course, it is depending on the form of plant which will be used. It's less a stress probably for fungi, but if you think of essential oils and herbal drugs, one of the points is probably to have more information on the possibility of transfer of these metabolites in the food, and particularly for milk, for example. Some questions are, can it affect health of human, and also possibly also like cheese processing can be affected. And the last point is also just a few ideas to get better coordination with the socioeconomics aspect and to make links with WG2. Some solution can be acceptable for meat production of sheep, but less in dairy use. And the acceptance by the farmers is also a key issue. And commercially, the organization of production can be a bottleneck. I hope I was not too long.
No, perfect. Thank you, Herve. There are questions appearing in Mentimeter already, which is great. The second question I have for you is partly answered already, but in which production systems are these applied today? I think you've answered that with your examples, but could they be of wider use?
So I think clearly the work done by Stig and his group in Copenhagen has shown one of the interests of the fungi is that it can be applied in a wide range of host species. And this is one of the interests of this solution. And it's also active against a wide range of different nematode species. For plant, it has been mainly used in against ruminants, it's particularly in sheep and goats. It began to be used in horses also. Some of my colleagues in INRAE are working also on possibility to apply it in horses. And yeah, herbal drugs are also used in poultry and pig also by Stig's group. So there's a wide range of possibility on hosts. And just as an interesting anecdote is one of the key possibility of use is a zoo animal, because they are very expensive, high value, and it seems to be a good solution for this sort of animals.
Thank you. There's a question on plant-based products maybe being similar to anthelmintics, and do you think that in the same vein there will be issues we run into with resistance or lack of efficacy for plant-based products?
Yeah, I think we have to keep that in mind with any sort of possible solution. It has been evoked for genetic resistance, or it has been evoked also for fungi, I think. For plants, we have circumstantial indication showing that it can, for tannin, we might, in collaboration with colleagues in Mexico, we suspect that some of the nematodes which have been in contact with tannins for long, several centuries, let's say, might be more resistant to the use of tannins.
Thank you. There's a question on whether there are any modeling data assessing the combined effects of using partly effective nutritionals and highly effective anthelmintics concerning reduction of use of anthelmintics.
I send you back the question. I think the guy who is a specialist in modelization is in front of me, but it's sure it's going to be really interesting to combine this in models.
Yeah, there's very little that I know of at the moment, but certainly I think it's a field that should be explored. And the final question for you, Herve, we will get to the questions that we don't have time to answer later, but the top voted question left is, in what sense do you consider Herbal so different from anthelmintics when both are actually some sort of chemical treatment?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's on the other hand, Herbal can be also mixed with the diet. So it depends more or less on the way you are giving the herbal and essential oils also to the animals. But in a way, yes, it's if I have to make a range, anthelmintics and herbal drugs are targeting the adult worms, and the main objective is to eliminate the worms. The use of nutraceuticals is a bit different because it's more preventive and it's offered to the animals. So it's depending also on the voluntary feed intake by the animals. And in a sense, the question of regulation and possible residues is probably more important to address with herbal drugs and essential oils, I think.
Thank you, Herve. That's perfect. We'll move on if that's okay, and invite Bruce in if Bruce is here. So Bruce Thompson has joined us, I hope. He's a dairy farmer in Ireland, and he's been very active in exploring alternative ways of controlling helminths, including learning lessons from New Zealand and maximizing use of ecosystem services. So hopefully he can share with us the perspective of an engaged farmer in this sphere. And I have 3 questions to put to you, Bruce, and then I'm going to monitor more in the Mentimeter. Right, so welcome and thank you. First question is, as a farmer and thinking of the potential of different options, so targeted selective treatment, diagnosis, plant-based control, vaccines, the sorts of things we've heard about, what are the expectations of farmers for these new control approaches? Okay, so within farming communities, the efficacy of the current antibiotics failing is not fully realized yet financially. So with 3 generations of a proven approach with using antibiotics, it's hard for farmers to look at alternatives, particularly with the risks that can be involved with changing away from a proven method. The thinking is that resistance is years down the road from us, and in terms of the products, then advice is readily available there, whereas the alternatives, the advice is not readily available. So yeah, and very often the alternatives being used can be associated with non-productive type of farmers. So there's a bit of a stigma there as well. Yeah, so that's kind of the current expectations amongst the farming community. There's a couple of really interesting points there. So linking on from that very nicely, actually, do you think complex solutions such as combining these different approaches can be made accessible to farmers? Yeah, well, we're looking at some of the complex solutions that would be the likes of resistant genetics in animals. So we have ICBF, which is the Irish database for animals, animal genetics. Last year launched a scale to show fluke resistance in certain sires, and we have there's grazing practices there available that like traffic light grazing as a novel grazing techniques in order to create avoidance from parasites while creating adaptive resistance within the animals. And of course, encouraging dung beetles then, which are kind of my favorite, to clean up pastures when the helminths are at the free living stage. Diagnostics then as well. So farmers are not really aware of all the diagnostic tools that are available, or the cost of using these, or interpreting them and bringing them back home to the farm. Practicing refugia, another tool that's not used on farm. But all these complex solutions that I'm listing there are readily available and workable on farms, because it's what we've done on our own farm to reduce antibiotics. So they're readily available, Bruce, but what do you think then are the main bottlenecks to implementing these solutions? Okay, well, I suppose there's a lack of promotion maybe of these solutions. So we're not fully aware of the upcoming risks in terms of antibiotic resistance, because it's not very apparent on farms that we haven't got acute antibiotic resistance, so it's subacute. We're not aware then of the financial savings that we could be gaining from reduction in antibiotics, and creating better animal welfare to reduce antibiotic usage. Confidence then is another one. So we hear of horror stories of some farmer a few miles away that didn't look at his animals well enough and ended up losing some with lungworm, for example,
and that puts the fear of God into a farmer that is afraid not to use these products. So a confidence thing. So I suppose that leads me on to a vet-farmer relationship, where we currently have a relationship where the vet is called for sick animals onto a farm, as opposed to paying our vets to keep the animals healthy. We're paying them to make them healthy. So I suppose we need a change of mindset of that. There's probably a lack then of real-time regional information then on parasite trends from, for example, the likes of processing facilities. So your ELISA blood tests from young stock in an area, if we see readings starting to rise, if that was on a real-time database, that information could be made available to veterinary surgeons to pass on to farmers, and linking in them with diagnostic laboratories. I suppose then there's little value then put on some of the alternatives, like our beneficial insects, and probably little belief in some of these alternatives. So I suppose promotion is probably the buzzword, really.
Thanks, that's perfect. We'll just take the top question from Mentimeter. There is one that asks whether you need more guidance on utilizing these, but I think you've answered that positively. There's a question on how you monitor antibiotic resistance status in your herd.
So it's currently what I'm doing is fecal egg count reduction tests. That's basically it.
And what's your experience with them?
Sorry, we don't use a lot of antibiotics anyway, so we're only testing calves there, and you're only looking at 2 or 3 doses in the year, so it's not going to be a very comprehensive study. Yeah,
that's great, thanks. No, that's fine. I mean, there is that question on, do you need more guidelines? And you mentioned that, but maybe you can expand on, apart from better information from the vet, what sort of guidelines on using these alternatives do you think would be most useful for farmers?
Yeah, well, I suppose maybe a consultancy role is probably there with the vet, and a framework for the vet to come up with a plan at the start of the grazing year that is adaptable to the conditions that are put in front of the farmer as the year progresses. And so the sharing of information then in terms of where the animals are grazing and risks that are being brought in front of the vet around from different farms.
Thank you, that's wonderful. Much appreciated, Bruce. We're going to have to move on to keep the time, but some of those questions that have come up on Mentimeter, we'll try to report back to the group on, but it's wonderful to have that perspective. It's confirmed some of what we think, but it's challenging us with some new perspectives as well. So much appreciated. We move now to the next panelist, and this is Thomas Gaurden from Zoetis. He used to be one of us. By one of us, I mean an out-and-out parasitologist, but he's since moved to industry and has a different perspective. So I have a couple of questions for you, Thomas, if you're ready. You're not muted, Thomas, but I can't hear a thing, so it might be a technical problem. In that case, while you're resolving that, I will come back to you, Thomas, but I'll move on to the fourth panelist, Athina Trachili, who is representing the European Union of Veterinary Practitioners. She's a vice president. She's also the president of the Pan-Hellenic Veterinary Association. And the European Union of Veterinary Practitioners represents across borders in Europe the veterinary profession, and seeks to improve standards, including through professional education. So very relevant, following on from Bruce's comments, that vets need to be better informed and more proactive perhaps in getting these messages across to farmers, and to support them in their efforts. So Athina, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. I hope everybody's fine. Thank you for inviting me in this meeting, in this webinar. It's a great honor for me to speak and deliver a talk about how the general practitioner, the veterinarians, can contribute to sustainable parasite control from our perspective. As a vet, I speak as a vet and also as a vice president of EAVP. I think the role of the general practitioner, the veterinarian, is of great importance, considering that what happens in the stable ends on the consumer's plate. And it is important that The vets, the general practitioner, are the scientists that come into direct contact with the farmer, and we are those people, the doctor that has to persuade the farmer to apply sustainable parasite. So I said that the vets, the general practitioner, are the scientists that comes into direct contact with the farmer, and this is the person that has to persuade the farmer to apply sustainable parasite control practices. Vets, general practitioner, therefore, are the one who first, they must be convinced, we have first be convinced of the need to implement sustainable practices, and then be trained, the vets I mean, on innovative approaches, and especially on the use of diagnostic data, and I mean parasitological, pathophysiological, immunological data for the implementation of target approaches. So the vets must be properly prepared so that in turn they can convince the farmers through. First, I have 3 signs, I have 3 points, very important points that I have to mention. We have to highlight the problem to the farmer and the positives that will arise if he make a sustainable parasite control. Secondly, highlight the possible financial losses suffered by the farmer from not using sustainable practices. And the third very important issue is the promotion and the advisory support in the application of the methodology of new sustainable practices in a simple and understandable way, so the farmer can convince that it's not very difficult to do it. But first, the vets has to show it. Dear colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, I think everybody knows that the use of veterinary medicines and antibiotics is vital. These drugs are, on the one hand, a unique weapon in the hands of the veterinarians in the practice, in our daily act to restore animal health. On the other hand, through the preservation of livestock, we contribute to the development of its country. So we have to take care and use sustainable parasite control. This is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Athina. It's very interesting to hear the farmer and then the vet, particularly the farmer saying, we're already trying to do this and we need more professional support, and then the vet perspective to equip ourselves and to persuade the farmers. Maybe there's a gap there because it seems like you're pushing at an open door, and maybe it's back to us to provide the technical support and advice to the vets also. Do you think?
Yes, but I have the answer. I think the problem is that if we had a new legislation system in every country that says that every farm must have his farm veterinarian to do the management, to prevent, to do the husbandry, to do the welfare issues, everything in his farm, and this farmer has some incentives from the government that could help a lot. So I think until now, not in every country, but in a lot of countries in the European community, there is the farm visitation system. So every farm must have a veterinarian, a general practitioner responsible for his farm, and this veterinarian is responsible for the treatment and make all the prevention schedule and all the sustainable approaches to his flock. This would help very, very much. So the farm would have a special scientist to help him.
That sounds like it would be very useful, different routes to get there perhaps. So Johannes, I see a mess. Thank you, Athina. I think we will move on to some thoughts now from Thomas, if he's able to be heard now, particularly on the outlook for future anthelmintics and what is needed to make them more sustainable. Thomas, over to you.
Thank you for providing the opportunity to join this forum. So, Eric, the outlook for future anthelmintics, and we're definitely focusing on ruminants here. So there is always appetite, I think, from the industry to start a development program for a new anthelmintic. But more specifically for ruminants, it might be good just to highlight a couple of items that we need to take into account. So first of all, I mean, is there a real need for a new anthelmintic? And I know that, I mean, within this fora, we're sometimes a little bit biased with our focus on anthelmintic resistance. And obviously from the market perspective, from a farmer perspective, parasitology and even anthelmintic resistance is maybe not their only issue. So the demand for new anthelmintics is there, but it's not always as a top priority for development of new products. So that's one thing. And maybe this is, Eric, best illustrated to some extent by the uptake of Monepantel and Dercantel as new products in the sheep markets. Those products are doing quite well, actually, but it's not that they have been adopted at a very large scale. I mean, sheep farmers are still using a lot of the white and yellow drenches, even though they are fully aware that they are not as effective anymore. So yeah, I mean, there is a need, but I would also call it a little bit of a perceived need sometimes from an anthelmintic resistance perspective. So that's one thing. The second thing that I would certainly like to highlight is I think we have been spoiled a little bit with all our good products, especially MLs, very effective against a lot of parasites, a lot of stages, wide spectrum, nice persistent efficacy, which is commercially very attractive. Maybe not always from an anthelmintic resistance point of view, but commercially it is. So if you develop a new product, how do you match that? How do you make your new product as attractive as some of the old ones? So I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, it is a question that regularly comes up when we are discussing new products, new product profiles for anthelmintics. But it's definitely not a kill issue, but it's something we have to take into account. And then as parasitologists, you might have noticed that a lot of new products came on the market for companion animals lately. I think the market has been swamped. And that's also something that we need to acknowledge, is that in production animal, the development cost for any product, including anthelmintics, is much higher compared to development cost in companion animals. And this is mainly driven by MRL, so withdrawal time, maximum residue limits, to some extent user safety, especially for injectable products, that is an issue, but also environmental safety. This is probably underestimated by a lot of people, but a lot of antiparasitic products also have activity against a lot of environmental organisms, and that risk, which is something we need to assess at every level of development, but also at when we are going through the regulatory approval process. So that's definitely a risk that is sometimes decreasing the appetite to go into new product development for antiparasitics. So maybe to conclude on this, Eric, there's always appetite for new products, but obviously I think the world changed a little bit between the 1980s and now, when we had a large influx of very good products with a lot of benefits. I think the benefits decreased a little bit and the risks increased a little bit for new product development there. So it's definitely not a red flag, but it's also not always a green light to go ahead with any new project.
Thank you, Thomas. I don't know if you're reading the Mentimeter, you seem to be anticipating all the questions, but there's one that maybe your discussion of the difficulties in developing new products leads directly onto, and that is, how willing is the industry to move from therapeutics into diagnostics?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question. I think Bruce also touched on that. I think customers evolved from just being pleased with treatment to focusing more on prevention and management, and that also includes diagnostics. And Eric, that is definitely a message that is well heard by industry. I'm not advocating our company alone, but I can tell you from my experience in our company, diagnostics is definitely one of the fast-growing areas here. And we just actually launched for parasitology a diagnostic tool, which is based on microscopy and which uses artificial intelligence. So you have a lot of automated diagnostics possibilities there. It's kind of still new and has to grow and expand, but it's definitely an area that industry is interested in.
Thank you very much. We're up to time now, so it's very nice of you, by the way, Thomas, to address all your answers to me personally, but there are 134 other people who...
I know, but I see you, so that's easy. Thank you.
Perfect. So I'll formally close this session, but Johannes has invited those who are able to stay on for a photograph, and maybe you have some Mentimeter results to share also, Johannes, but I'll formally close this panel session and the session as a whole and hand back to our very capable chair, and thank Johannes for all his efforts in organizing this meeting.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, just I'll keep it very brief for the Mentimeter. Just first, I'll try to share my screen. So, which are important criteria to speak of sustainable parasite control? Well, I'll just try to read some inputs without any attempt to cover the most important ones. Monitoring parasite infection levels, affordable, ease of implementation, economy, animal health, animal welfare, ecology. Okay, so please provide us with more comments. I'll move to the next point. This is perhaps something we didn't discuss in so much detail today. Which are the most promising technologies to improve future parasite control? So I see vaccine very often mentioned, automated fecal egg count, grazing management, targeted treatment, ease of diagnosis, nutraceuticals, and so on. So, okay, thank you for all the inputs received. And this is, I think, the last one. What kind of guidelines would you implement to translate research into practice? A holistic approach taking into account animal health, pasture management, environment, anthelmintics management, genetics, and everything else. So that's the ideal future, I think, that we're working to. So as you have seen in the Mentimeter, you can also provide just your experience on the meeting, how you would rate it, and potential suggestions how we can improve future meetings. So also, thank you if you could leave your comments there, but I will not share this for the moment. So I would also like to thank you everybody for participating. To me, I've enjoyed it very much. The meetings, I learned a lot of things. I hope the same for you. The next time we hope to interact is at the WAVP in July next year in Dublin, if all the restrictions allow. But that is when we plan to have also a COMBAR session at the WAVP, and I hope to see many of you there. Thank you very much.